gun confiscation, whether your party's in charge or not, and whether you're just well-meaning, the road to hell was paved with good intentions. As trite as that saying is, it's the truth. It is insidious. And when you have the government trying to pass these inefficacious laws that make no sense, they actually don't do anything. It would be one thing if the laws actually reduce gun crime, which they don't. Okay, that's proven that they don't actually reduce gun crime. And even if they did, one could make the argument, so what? So what? There's a cost to having the ability to be free and to be able to weather a storm in whatever form it may take. Take self-driving, for example. It's a great example because, the government it's a great technology, but they can seize up your car in a moment's notice if they actually wanted to. Okay, so do we want to move into a world where it's illegal to drive? People are going to say, yeah, driving is bad. People plow their cars through people. You can weaponize it, right? And more accidents happen. So what? You want to be free in case it's an insurance policy, right? But let's just say that there was a legitimate, there was a demonstrable reduction in gun crime as a result of firearms being confiscated. So what? There is no legitimate reason right now for them to be doing this, and that is why it is very nefarious. Because they know what we're talking about. They know, in terms of whoever is handing down these orders for these people to come on these panels and start talking about things they know nothing about, only that gun bad and disarm population good. I actually don't think that a lot of the front people for this really understand what they're doing, but understand how nefarious it is. And that's how you know it's nefarious, because there is no demonstrable effect on gun crime when removing firearms. So, at least not in Canada anyways. And again, even if there was. So, this is how you know it's evil. It's malevolent in nature, and how ultimately it ends. It ends in authority being abused. And we know that it's historically precedented, that authority will abuse power. Last night, I was watching a video of 1930s Chicago, and it was colorized and it was put in 60 frames per second. And it's remarkable how really little has changed. Everybody thinks, oh, the world is so different now. But, there's buildings, there's people walking around, there's cars driving around, there's kids playing in the street. Not much has changed. And that was before World War II. The abuse of authority is historically precedented. And in fact, it's almost guaranteed to happen. So when you have people who are anti-gun and at the same time getting their heads beat in by the police because their political talking point is not thought too highly of, something's wrong. Okay, we've been inculcated with this idea that self-preservation is wrong until we're getting beaten over the head by the police. So I think that what happens with a lot of liberals, for lack of a better term, is because they're not prepared themselves, and this doesn't even have to be liberal, it could be conservative. There are conservatives who aren't preppers. But anybody who, has this knee-jerk, prepper, paranoid person, angry all the time. Anybody who has that knee-jerk reaction that preppers are just living in fear all the time, chances are what's happening there on an unconscious level is that they're realizing how unprepared they are, and they need to rationalize their inaction by viewing this person as crazy. That's what it ultimately boils down to. And the same thing is true with firearms. You don't perceive there to be a threat because you don't value your life. You don't value self-preservation. So there is no threats, right? Until, of course, there's going to be militarized police that you're going to chalk up to being the fault of the right, which it was likely policies of the left that helped get them there. And this is why it's an apolitical issue. And it's called turnkey totalitarianism, because it doesn't matter who is sitting in the driver's seat at the time. Should they want to crack down, they turn that key, and all of those technologies that were put there to empower you now get used to attack you. All the surveillance and tracking technologies, the full self-driving, the inability for you to procure any sort of firearm that fires over a certain rate per second. So it's in this fear, and it's their fear, right? Because they say preppers live in fear, but it's actually them who fear their own inadequacy when compared to preppers, because going back to what I initially stated, they understand the fragility of the system, and they want a level playing field if it all goes to shit. And how do you have that? Well, you have everybody just as dependent as you. It's crabs in a bucket. And this will sound trite, but many people who've committed atrocities over the years didn't believe that they were committing atrocities at the time. And they wouldn't have thought that what they were doing, the policies that they were promoting, were basically paving the groundwork for such atrocities to be committed in the future. And understand that the people at the top, they have an insatiable thirst for power. And that is never going to be relinquished. Once they have the guns, they're never going to give them back. We had the long gun registry. That was the one exception, I think. But once they take these rights away, they're likely never going to be rescinded or repealed. Now, the RCMP right now in Manitoba is talking about going door to door for efficient mobile collection of firearms, because there's these remote communities and they have to go now and acquire these firearms by force. And of course, this is going to, unfortunately, lead to altercations, I presume. Now, if you're a person who's worried about firearms in Canada, number one, go and support the Canadian Coalition for Firearms Rights. They're the only people who are doing good work with respect to trying to preserve whatever privileges we have, and again, certainly trying to expand those privileges that we have. And I have to call them privileges here in Canada because we don't view it as an inalienable human right. Of course, we all do as individuals, but the government doesn't recognize it as such. In Saskatchewan, you can also move here because there's some protections in place in an attempt to interdict this gun confiscation which looms overhead. The Saskatchewan Firearms Act, passed in April of 2023, aims to protect the rights of lawful firearms owners in the province by establishing license requirements for seizure agents, requiring fair compensation for seized firearms, and establishing a provincial firearms regulatory system. So this is how Saskatchewan is going to make it complicated for the feds to come and try to repossess and expropriate everybody's firearms. The act aims to ensure the rights of responsible firearms owners and that they are respected, and that the province has its own legislation to address their concerns. So here's what's going to happen. The act establishes licensing requirements for individuals and businesses, just putting more barriers in the way of the feds trying to confiscate your guns. Involved in firearms expropriation, ensuring a heavily regulated process. Also, fair compensation. Now, for me personally, I don't like the conversation about compensation because it makes it seem as though if you give me fair value for my firearm, then I'll be okay with it, which I'm not, right? So the compensation argument almost moves the goalpost in a way I don't like. So I don't give a shit if I'm getting $1 or $10,000. I don't want to give up my guns, okay? Now, and this is perhaps something that people might want to consider. It's an ethical thing too. Like if somebody were to give you, 10x the amount for your firearms, would you give them all away? And then you have to ask, why are they paying me so much to get rid of these things that, we know is not going to have any sort of measurable effect on gun crime, that almost makes it scarier, doesn't it? Anyways, the act mandates fair compensation for firearms being seized as overseen by a firearms compensation committee. More hoops to jump through. Delay, 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 in the hopes that this can be repealed by Pierre Poilievre of the Conservatives. The Saskatchewan Firearms Office will be responsible for administering new legislation and will take on the expanded role in prosecuting non-violent provincial firearms offenses. The act also acquires forensic and ballistic testing of seized firearms. So that's another step. They seize a firearm, they got to test it. Where are they going to test it? That's going to be a whole process, right? So what I'm saying is, if you want to postpone what I hope isn't inevitable, then come to Saskatchewan, and I think Alberta has a very similar policy as well. And lastly, as I've always said, isn't it funny how with these authoritarian regimes, these burgeoning authoritarian regimes that are in their infancy, isn't it funny how they're always willing to put a gun in your hand when it comes to killing somebody else overseas, but they're so readily willing to take those guns away? And that's how you know when you're approaching World War III, is when they're ready to give the guns back. But there's a caveat. You have to go over there and probably die for some rich man's war, right? And so now that the issue of civil defense has taken root in Canada as a result of the trade war, you have all of these liberals talking about armed resistance against a U.S. military incursion. And while that might seem fantastical, it is not beyond the realm of possibility for Canada to defend itself with guerrilla-style tactics against a armed U.S. invasion, however unlikely as it might be. It's not beyond the realm of possibility, but it certainly is impossible if nobody is armed, okay? And so it's just interesting to see that as the shit hits the fan, whether it was the pandemic or anything else, that's when liberals run out and buy guns. And even that reverse Trump effect, in that, when Trump gets into power, everybody feels they need a firearm to protect against, the far right menace. And so all we're saying is that gun rights transcend politics. The reason why I'm endorsing Pierre Poilievre as the next leader of Canada is strictly because he has stated that he will repeal these unjustified gun legislations that have been passed by the Liberal government. That's it. That's all. And so I hope that I've not alienated a significant portion of my audience who is on the left, but is sensible and understands that this is something that this should not even be a political issue. There is no reason whatsoever why gun ownership should be an issue which is only promoted by the right. It makes no sense whatsoever. On that note, once again, I openly and resolutely support Pierre Poilievre for the next leader of Canada. We got to get these guys out of there, because if we don't, we're going to lose our rights. And it's going to affect you and your children and your children's children. And these are rights that we're never going to get back. So please, move to Saskatchewan, support Pierre, at least this time around. Let's hold him to task, and support the CCFR. And if you'd like to, support this channel as well. Thanks for watching. Canadian Prepper out.